Hello, my name is Carol May Whittick, spiritual life coach and your host of Her Conversations, Tools for the Awakening. Her is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. This is the optimal state to embody in order to attract our highest desires. What is the awakening? This is the moment in time when humanity rises up out of the darkness. Who is awakening? Each one of us present on earth today, reclaiming our sovereignty, seeking greater possibilities in our reality and looking for solutions. We know being awakened is not a lofty ideal but a necessity. If we can transform ourselves, we can change the world. Guests on Her Conversations will speak to your spirituality, sensuality and soul. Listen to their stories and hear how they are in service to the world. Let their words in these conversations embolden and inspire you. My guest on this week's episode is Ange de Lumiere. She's a spiritual lawyer, author and podcaster. After a 15-year thriving career as an international business lawyer, Ange left the corporate world to pursue what she likes to call her PhD in intuition from the University of Life. She has explored various modalities, but she is most well known for Akashic records. She has also authored several books and is in the process of finishing her second memoir called Spiritual Lawyer. During our conversation, we talk about spirituality, ways of demystifying it to bring it to the real world, its misconceptions and its misapplications. So as always, I begin by asking my guests, Her is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. When do you feel that higher energetic resonance?
It's when I do my work, when I talk to people like you, when I record podcasts, and when I'm in client sessions, because I do it from what I call the Akashic Records energy, which is my specialty, which is the highest possible vibration that you can connect, I suppose, whilst you're still in a human body. And that energy feels amazing. It's uplifting, it's light, it's fun, we giggle a lot, and it's almost like the heaviness of being human is lifted, at least for some time.
There's no right answer to that question. It's just how it sounds to you and what your response is.
And I'm sure there could be many more answers to that question as well. I've just picked the one that came up first, but I have so many others, like when I cook, when I dance, when I sing, when I listen to good music, etc., etc. When I look in my children's eyes. There's so many different ways to experience that high energetic resonance, isn't there?
Perfect. Thank you. And Ange, before we go on, can you just give a little bit of your story? What got you to doing the work and being who you are at this point in time? What is a little bit of your journey?
So my journey was quite dramatic in a way because I used to be an international business lawyer, worked in the corporate world for 15 years. Didn't consider myself spiritual, didn't consider myself psychic, but I had this thirst for knowledge. I wanted to look, I can't do small talk. I can't have a shallow conversation. And that's been a difficulty for me in social circles because that's usually how people start. So I remember even like in my early 20s, wondering about reincarnation, wondering about things that weren't touched at all in the religion I was brought up in, and wanting to understand more. Past lives were fascinating for me. I wanted to know about my past life, but there's no one around that could do that for me back in France, because that's where I come from, Paris in France. And so I started reading books on the internet. I ordered most of my stuff from Amazon in the US because that was the only place you could order books in English, other than going to the local W.H. Smith in Paris. But then they had such a limited, very, very small selection of things. So I suppose it started with a couple of friends I met in the UK when I was doing a gap year as a student who were more into these things. I had a friend called Michael who was into astrology. I never gelled with astrology, but still he had more of an open-minded to, things a bit esoteric. And I had a friend who loved going to do for readings for herself. So they both kind of planted, I suppose, little seeds. But what really happened, I think the acceleration happened when I had to make the decision whether to move to the UK in 2001. And I didn't feel that the tools that I had up to then to make decisions were the right tools to make a decision as as big as that. Because by moving to the UK, I was leaving my marriage. I had 2 young children under the age of 6. I was leaving my support system, and it felt like such a huge decision to make on my own, so to speak. So I did go and have a reading from a lady who was highly recommended and who I had been to see a couple of times, and she said, go. You will be happy in the UK, much happier than in France. British people love you because I'm a bit eccentric, whereas in France, eccentricity is not looked at very, kindly. And so I did. And I suppose it gave me that reassurance that there were some people out there who had access to a bigger, I suppose, a higher wisdom, where you can see it in the bigger picture rather than what you just had in front of you. And so a couple of years after I moved to the UK, I decided to go for another reading. And that's the reading that literally blew my life away in a way, or my mind anyway. There's something happened in that reading that was very, at the same time, wonderful, and at the same time that rattled me and kind of shook the foundations of my life at a very deep level. And what happened, so I went to see this psychic medium who was recommended by a little crystal shop that was next in my neighborhood. Went to see her. My grandmother came through right away. She had only died a couple of years before, so it was really lovely to hear from her. Big surprise as well. This woman started talking about spirit guides, and I was like, what the heck is a spirit guide? I have no idea. I didn't know the difference between angel spirit guides or any of that stuff. It was completely new to me. And then she ended the session, and this is where I suppose the rubber hit the road, right? She ended the session by asking her husband to come in and check on me. And I was like, what's wrong with me? And I was just starting to wonder if they'd seen maybe crazy thoughts, like, have they seen cancer? Is she afraid to say something? So the guy is a palm reader, and he takes my hands, he looks at them, and they have a like misunderstood look between them. And I'm like, oh, I hate when people do that. Yeah. I was really worried, sweaty palms as well. He was holding my hands, and he left. And she said, Ange, do you realize that you have angel dust coming out of your hands? And I looked at her. I was like, it was like she had hit me on the head with a hammer. I was so stunned by what she said and scared as well. I just wanted to run out of this house as fast as possible. I didn't want to hear what she had to say. It was just too much. Do you understand? Can you relate to, what a shock it can be? And I'm a lawyer. I'm a single mom of 2 kids. I have to, earn a living as well. This is not something that I can work with. So I rented my car. I sat in the car for at least half an hour, not knowing what to do, feeling completely lost, feeling triggered, feeling upset. And you would think that if someone told you that, you'd feel happy, but I didn't. This is the paradox. I don't know why I reacted that way, but it was something that I wasn't ready for. And I didn't even understand that how can I have angel dust coming out of my hands? I mean, this doesn't make sense. It was so alien for me. But then I went home and I tried to settle down, and then I woke up the next day and my mind said to me, if you have this gift, then you're supposed to use it. And so I decided to go to this lady's. She did circles. She taught spiritual healing, and I thought, I'm going to give this a go. I'm still a lawyer. I'll go to the meetings and see what happens. But I think if I had to put a peg in the ground, that's when it really started, because it was very real. I still didn't believe her, and I still don't believe her today. My mind can't quite grasp that concept. But I suppose it kind of launched me a little bit on a different path. So I started learning about spiritual healing. And then someone mentioned Reiki in the healing group. And I was like, well, if we're learning spiritual healing, why is there Reiki? Why is there 2 different modalities? Isn't that just the one thing? And so I looked into Reiki, trained to Reiki level, started thinking that Reiki felt more aligned to me because it wasn't so much attached to religion, and I'm not a religious person. And then one thing led to another. I actually lost my job because of the Reiki training.
Really?
I actually believe that when you're attuned to Reiki, it does this massive energetic purge in your life, and that whatever's not aligned with you goes. And literally within months of training in Reiki, I lost my job. And I know that I would have never left my job unless I was kicked out. So I knew that the coincidence was too close for it not to be, related. I couldn't discard it as a coincidence, basically. And yeah, I wasn't aligned with my job. I tried. So from my career as a lawyer, towards the end, because I had 2 children and I couldn't travel as much as I used to, because I used to travel the world for my job, like almost every month. I had a big trip, South America, Asia, whatever. But with 2 small children, it was getting more and more difficult, even though I had grandmoms that could step in. But I wanted to be there for my children in a way that I couldn't. So I branched into knowledge management and training and creating systems for the team. And however much I tried to make it work, it was still not aligned because I didn't feel I made a difference on a personal, spiritual, emotional, intellectual level. It was, I enjoyed it tremendously. Don't get me wrong. I'm so grateful I had this career. It was the best. But it wasn't nourishing me. So I suppose when I trained in that Reiki, I took a sabbatical for 3 months because I had been with the company for more than 10 years. So I had this opportunity, which is why I trained in Reiki and did all these things. When I came back, I knew that my boss had gone. Another one had replaced. They were restructuring. They wanted me to go back to France. I didn't. And so my job ended, basically. So that's the explanation of why I believe Reiki actually got me to lose my job. It's because it wasn't aligned. And anything that's not aligned when you start to, I suppose, walk that path is going to be pulled away. If you don't do it yourself, then the universe will step in and say, that's it, girl, you're out.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, I've got this kind of notorious thing of just like walking out the door and then trying to work and then trying to figure it out. But in the instances in jobs where I've just not been able to be there for very much longer, I notice a change. If I'm trying to force something personally, I feel a frustration within myself. I feel it on a bodily level. It's almost as if I want to call it an out-of-body experience, is because I become very observant of myself, and I know that I'm lying to myself, and it will be my own voice just telling me, like, you're not supposed to be here, you're not doing that, and it's this persistent thing that then kind of, if I don't make a move quick enough, I'll get into a frustrated situation, and then I'll kind of create the situation where it's no longer possible for me to be there. There's jobs that I'd had when you're just walking up to the door and you're like, I can't go in. It's almost like the building becomes black. For me, the minute I walked through the door, it was just like a weird kind of, it felt right. Everything felt slow and goopy and dark being there, or being in situations where I know that I'm not serving myself, my higher self, where I'm not contributing on a deep level, and I'm just going there and doing it for the money. And I think I can see how that's always been a prolonged thing, which is why I've always tried to have what people call a side hustle now. There's always been something that if I'd had a main job, that I'm still getting some level of income or some level of enjoyment out of alongside it. The balance was trying to tip it over the other way. And actually I want to ask you about that, because you went and did Reiki. So Reiki is going to kind of expand you, like you say, and open you up to all different kinds of things. Do you remember those moments when you went back to your law career? Did you feel like you had to make adjustments within yourself to kind of fit in there? Did you feel more expanded, having to shrink down?
Something really interesting happened when the day I went back. Is that there was a lady who actually cut her hand very badly on a piece of broken glass whilst doing her dishes, and came into the office with this big bandage. And so I had an opportunity to practice Reiki right away in the office, which was really lovely, actually. And I haven't shared this story before. And she was a girl that I related quite a lot with. And so I kind of offered, I said, look, I understand you might not be into this, but I've just trained in Reiki. Would you like me to do some on your hand? And so I did for a couple of days. And so I didn't feel this disconnect. The disconnect was more from the boss that I had before who had actually invited me to come over to the team in the UK, was being made redundant. And I could feel that I wasn't welcome anymore. It's interesting what you said is at the same time, because I'm at the stage right now where I feel that I want to go back into the corporate world, maybe even in a job. So I'm actually setting my intention that I'm going to find the perfect place that's going to feel really, really good. And one of the ideas I have is to work as a well-being officer, maybe in the police force or something like that, where I can actually be of value to support people who are under a lot of stress and dealing with quite strong energies, to give them the tools to feeling good in their own jobs and not being affected by these things. I'm not one of these person who say it must be this way or that way, or I kind of was thrown into the pool of self-employment because I had no other choice. I had lost my job and I had to try and make a living out of it. And it didn't happen very well. And it was frustrating for me, partly because I have 4 autistic children with very high needs. But also because, and I'm going through a divorce right now, I was married to actually someone who was very controlling. And so for as long as I was under his control, nothing really could happen for me substantially, if that makes any sense. So I'm right now opening up my world for the first time, to the real possibility of embracing this work to the level that it was supposed to, if that makes any sense. This doesn't mean I didn't have amazing experiences, lots of wonderful clients, and a business that I felt proud of. I'm not going to go too much into the detail, but my ex only allowed me to work 1 day a week. And it's kind of hard to build a business on 1 day a week. And I still managed to have a podcast and to, have £5,000 months whilst working only 1 day in my business. But I was always feeling that I was pushing against something, which is not the case anymore. So that's quite good. I know you haven't asked me the question, but there was a second stage of after the Reiki training on this path. And that was when I used to I was fascinated by the whole clairvoyant psychic experience, because I had this lady who helped me so much back in France, but also my sister found out that my grandmother was psychic, and we all had our doubts about it, or the fact that maybe she might be. And she found out that she used to do tarot readings, which I had no idea. And my sister was training in various modalities, healing modalities, but not. So I went to go and see these psychics just to see how they were working, out of curiosity, also to get some guidance, because I was going through a pretty difficult period in my life. And every single psychic said to me, you should be doing what I'm doing. And I'm like, no, I don't want to go down there. It was even worse than the angel dust coming out of my hands. That was bad enough as it was. I was like, psychic, no. But after 6 months of being told that consistently, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do this tarot weekend that's happening locally. I'm going to give it a try and have fun. So I went there, and literally, do you know how people go with their best friends? And I didn't have anybody to bring because I didn't have any friends at the time. So I had to be paired up with the teacher, practicing my tarot skills on her, which was terrifying. But she said to me, oh my God, you're completely accurate. You're really good. You should be doing what I'm doing. And I was like, okay, that's when the penny dropped finally. So I thought, okay, if I'm supposed to do that, then let's go and give it a try. And that's how I got into the whole tarot psychic stuff, which felt probably more difficult than the healing stuff, because I knew that I could not hurt anyone with the Reiki, that it could only enhance and support. But with the tarot, there was this extra level of responsibility that people come to you, they're vulnerable, they want answers to questions that are so deep and so difficult. And what if I get it wrong? I was really, I had this basic constant fear of getting it wrong, which I suppose is a sign that you're completely out of your comfort zone, which I was. But then I had people coming back again and again, and people telling me even 2 years after their reading how much it helped them, how accurate it was, etc. So I kept going, basically. Wow. And I suppose phase 3 was when I was growing more and more unsatisfied of the fact that people literally wanted me to take over their lives and make decisions for them. And interestingly enough, a lot of people who came to me needed healing as well, more than the reading. So it ended up in a healing session rather than a pure psychic session. And so that's when I realized that actually the kind of readings that I'd been doing, only because I came across a book by chance. Well, I don't believe in chance, but I came across a book about Akashic records, and I realized what I've been doing all along was that. And it started to feel a lot more congruent with how I looked at the world, because when you do an Akashic records reading, it can be anything that the person needs. So it can be part healing, it can be psychic work, it can be law of attraction work, it can be planning to see what you really want from life. But it is from the fact that you are the co-creator. So there's no set future, right? Whereas in the reading, although I knew that whatever I told the people who came to me for a reading, that it was only valid for the time that I did it, and that if they changed the way that they lived or thought or approached life, then they could change their future. It's not the conversation that we were having in the moment. Whereas with the Akashic Records thing, it's much more that sort of conversation. It's not, am I going to marry this person? Is, do you want to? And what do you want out of a relationship? And is this relationship right for you? And all that sort of thing, which is so much more empowering than the classic tarot reading, if that makes sense. So I see it almost like 3 stages, if you see what I mean. So starting with the healing piece, then the tarot piece, and now more of the Akashic Records piece, which dropped in 2018. So I've been doing Akashic Records reading since then, but I focus specifically on business because of my background, and because I feel that I believe that businesses and entrepreneurs are the ones who are going to ultimately change the world. They have the power through their money, through their impact, social impact, economic impact, financial impact. They have the power to change the world that we live in. And so I'm passionate about bringing that spirituality and that awareness, I suppose, within the business world, so that people function to the highest level they're supposed to, and really have the impact they're meant to have. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I really like that you've said that, especially about wanting to introduce or bring spirituality into corporate settings and those structures. Because even when I'm thinking about who am I speaking to, I can preach to the choir, and everyone kind of understands where I'm going to. But then when I'm thinking but where do I think it I would have more impact? And that's where it's the area where I think that I can have the conversation, but it just needs to have a conversation that is more on an aligned way, because everyone wants to be the best they can be. I'm thinking women in corporate situations as well, to be able to have that, to achieve on all levels, have all the worldly achievements. We need to see that, but also don't separate yourself from that aspect of yourself, so that you can achieve all of the things and more, but then not feel that you're disconnected from a part of yourself just by maintaining the visible aspects of your achievement, so that there's a deeper aspect you've achieved, and then also to be able to make it more, your dreams more attractive to other people. Because I think there's almost like a standoff sometimes between women who are more entrepreneurial and spiritually minded, and the way that they will view their counterparts within the corporate world. There's almost like a kind of they're doing all the things, but they're not in touch with their feminine. And then the corporate is looking over to kind of the spiritual side of going but this is the real world. So
I talk about it saying there's the business world, and then there's the fluffy unicorns. And I want to create a middle way, because most people don't relate with one completely or the other. We need to be able to create what really works for us. And that's why I suppose my biggest passion since 2021 has been to become like the intuition lady in business, where I can teach entrepreneurs and people in the corporate world how to use intuition in business, so that they can combine the intellect with the intuition. And then with that, you get to the intuitive intelligence, which is, I believe, the highest form of intelligence, the most powerful. So there's lots of entrepreneurs that actually, including male entrepreneurs, who use that without knowing that they're doing it, or if they do, they don't know how to explain how they do it. Whereas I've studied it long enough now, over 15 years. I call that, as a bit of a joke, a tongue-in-cheek, my PhD in intuition from the University of Life, but it's true. I've gone so much in depth into understanding how this works. I've run, I used to have a signature 5-day challenge where I taught people how to trust their intuition, which has now become a proper course that I'm going to launch in the fall. But I know how to teach people with a process, because people like processes in business. They don't just like, oh, come on, tune in and see how it feels. No. So, but I feel the world is ready. I have that gut feeling that it is ready. And for me, my mission is to put intuition on the curriculum all the way from primary school to universities. And one of the reasons is, and you've read the first three chapters of my new memoir, it's because intuition literally saved my life. I wouldn't be here if my intuition hadn't been so strong.
Yeah, and that's what I liked about those 3 chapters. They went back way, they went past way too quickly. You're just like, oh, okay, that's over there. But what it was is like you just talking about very real world events, and then just having a knowing or a knock or an idea that this should happen, or and you kind of act on it, and then in hindsight, it's like, oh, and realizing literally that your life has been saved in that moment. And there, it got me thinking about there's certain points in my life where I've been saved, literally been saved by just the certain knowing. And one I can share with you, I used to live in a place in South London, and it was a big kind of Victorian house built on a hill a little bit, a beautiful place. But to get back to the main road, there was quite a steep kind of step down as you kind of walked down to the pavement and then kind of walked onto the main road. And I remember kind of walking down, you're walking down and you're kind of like tiptoeing down a little bit, and you're feeling a little bit of momentum build. But almost before I stepped back, and I still would have been on the pavement, almost before I stepped past, and there was like a wall that was level. So there was a bit of a blind spot before I got onto the pavement. Something pushed me, literally pushed me back. And it was just like, I was like, what the, you kind of looking around, like there was nothing there visible. And I'm looking around to see like, what was it that pushed me? And that by the time I kind of looked left and right to kind of work out what it was that pushed me, and then kind of straightened up and started to walk forward, a van literally pulled on to the pavement, and was kind of pulled on in a really, like, you was someone kind of rushing on to park really quickly because they knew they shouldn't have parked there. Had I have not had this push, like, I would have been under the van pretty much, So like instances of things that happen that don't necessarily make sense, or knowings, or you should go here, or you shouldn't go here, or should be there, or you should tell this person that thing, is like, reminded me of that. Because I think as well, like you say, if you just remind people that they've had instances of knowing things multiple times in their life, and a lot of the time will be like, oh, well, especially if it's just a small thing, you'll just kind of shrug it off and call it a coincidence, or one of those things that happen. But then when it's something that means that you're not in a burning building, then it kind of logs in your mind that, hey, I should have gone there, and for whatever reason I wasn't there. And you start to realize it. And if you start to kind of make more notes of when you've had knowings, or the things, like you think of a song, it comes on the radio, you think of someone, they call you, it's just knowing that there's like this ultimate connection, that gut feeling that you have about something, either to go for it or to stay away from it. Is we all have that, we all know that, and we kind of brush it off as nothing. But if you actually kind of like start to chalk it down and make note of those things, you'll realize that you are being guided all the time to kind of keep you in safe, and you can override it and pay the price, and then the pain will teach you the lesson, as it were. But as I read those first 3 chapters, I was thinking, is there more of those instances in that book, and then as you kind of like pull it together and realize that there's something bigger working for you? How does it work in the book?
I think I intended this memoir, so the memoir talks about how I went from being a lawyer to being what I do today. Mm-hmm. And it's quite interesting because I've stopped working on memoir completely. It's on version 4, draft number 4, and it's very, very close to be finalized. But I've had this impulse, actually, literally, to launch a spiritual summit for July. only a month ago, and I was on my sabbatical writing my memoir, so it was completely not on the radar. But what you're saying is really important, because what I intended with this memoir is to show that it's just small steps that you can, you don't have to go and on a retreat in Bali to do meditation 10 hours a day or whatever it is that you want to do in order for you to embrace your spiritual path. It's right here, right now. And it's those little nudges, and it's starting to make sense and connecting the dots very slowly. And in a way, I feel, apart from my angel dust episode, most of it was quite gentle and pushed me as I was ready. Do you know what I mean? No further than what I was ready, but still dropped some very interesting and different ways to look at life that anybody had ever told me. In a way, I was lucky not to have a spiritual teacher, because I had to rely on myself to tune into my intuition. And now that I understand the intuitive process so much better, I know that possibly 80 to 90% of people, the way their intuition speaks to them is through a knowing. And there's a specific words in the New Age world for the knowing as a form of intuition. It is very frustrating, because you think you're making everything up. Right. But I feel that because this is the way I receive my intuition, and I've been battling with it, with my intellect and my intuition for so long, I'm more likely to understand what most people are going to feel like, rather than if I was born clairvoyant as a child and then I see things. And so when you see things very clearly, it's easy. You see it, either you decide to act it or not. And I actually, with all the people I've met on my journey, I realized that sometimes clairvoyants get a bit lazy because they see things and then they decide not to act on it. Whereas I know if I saw something, I would definitely act on it, because it would be so clear and so much clearer than what I get normally, which is frustrating me. It reminded me actually a little bit of, because I did also a translation degree as part of my studies as a lawyer. And there's this guy who was part of the course, a student like me, who was trilingual at birth. That means that he spoke fluent English, Spanish, and French. And I was so jealous of him, because I had to learn English the hard way, through blood and sweat, every single word, and having to go in the lab and listening to things and learn. And he said, one day we had this conversation where I did tell him, well, gosh, I'm so envious of your gifts. Just like I've been envious of people who are clairvoyant and clairaudient for as long as I can remember. And he said to me, he sat and he was so pragmatic and said to me, look, there's one thing I don't have that you have, Ange. You have this passion for it that I don't, because it's all fallen to me like on a platter, and I don't, and it's made me a bit lazy. Whereas for you, you had to learn it, through the hard work and the discipline and everything else. So you're much more passionate and much more, you continue to learn, whereas I kind of stay more stagnant. And I think that kind of woke me up a little bit to, how sometimes we envy other people, and we should just stay on our track and just appreciate what we have, really.
It makes me think of so many things as well. But, I just wanted to go back on something that you said about making it up. And I was having one of my walks the other day, and I was just having a really deep think about imagination and how people doubt the things that are in their head and imagination, and they're like, oh, I don't want to, I'm just making it up. But it's like, at what point is, and this is just a question that, I'm still trying to figure out, so I'm just throwing it to you. This is just like when people say, oh, I'm just making it up, or it just came from my imagination. It's just, this disregard that has been embedded in most people's psyche of the things that they see in their mind, because it's not here, or because it doesn't come through a book or, a TV channel or something official, that just because it's coming through your mind, and no one else can see it or hear it at that point, that you're just making it up and it has no value. For me, that's like talking about, when you're talking about having a passion for something, I've never not believed that, because I've always written songs, made things up, and seen how it can come from one side and be real. So for me, it's a given, it's like, it's the kind of thing. But then I meet people when they go, oh, but I'm not creative, I'm not a creative person, and they have what you might consider to be a very corporate, everyday, left brain kind of job, and yet still they don't see their imagination working for them. And you almost have to kind of push them into their creativity and go, look at all the things that you do in your life. You've got dressed. Why did you wear those things? The way that you furnish your home, what you eat on a daily basis, creativity doesn't have to be like 10-foot oil paintings in a museum that everyone's saying is art. Like art is the way that you live, and then the things that you put in your life is art. It's like, how are you seeing, or how would you be able to open people up to the idea that this making things up is what life is about, is making it up. We're all kind of moving forward and putting the stones down literally as we go, and to not disregard it as something that's frivolous and untrue.
So I think part of it would be to go back to how the mind works. And I'm glad training as a clinical hypnotherapist completely changed the way I looked at the world. Because I realized how my mind worked. And then I realized that as a lawyer, my mind is so important. I should be trained in understanding how my mind works and how innovation and creativity works. Lawyers need to be creative and innovative to find solutions to problems. And you can't find the solution at the level of the problem that you get. When you understand how the mind works, it all becomes laser clear. Because I'm going to take the example of lawyers because that's what I know best, but lawyers, when they encounter a problem, and they're trained to look at problems and to find problems in everything, and to, project a problem and find the solution. So there are in their amygdala, which is the part of the brain, which is called the reptile brain. There's lots of different names that have been given to it, which is here to keep you safe. And that's where you have all these fears and all these, and they compound. And your amygdala is not able to make the difference between real danger and imagined danger. So you have this part of the brain where you can get stuck, and where all the news that you listen to, before this interview, we talked about so-called the economy. There's still people who are thriving. But for most of us, if we believe the diet of information and data that we're fed, we should be completely depressed. This is the amygdala at its best or worst. It's here to keep you safe, though. There's nothing wrong or right about it. And then there's the creative mind that we all have. This is part of how our brain works. And that part is a solution mode. But you can't find the solution whilst you're stuck in the amygdala part. So this is where clinical hypnotherapy can help, because it takes you into imagining things. And the imagination world is actually really just expanding and thinking of things in a different way. And we can tap into that in moments that I'm sure everybody who listens to this podcast episode will relate, such as when you go for a run. Not everybody runs, but if you have a shower, or if you do the dishes, or if you drive, you will have those pockets of time where your mind is sort of soothed, because you don't have to think about everything that you're doing. You don't have to think about putting the gear on unless you just try to learn to drive. But for most of us, we're at the stage where we've driven long enough that we don't have to think about all the minute detail of driving that needs to be done. So our mind is sort of relaxed, and then ideas can start to float. Solution will come to you that maybe you've been trying to find a solution for 3 weeks, but then you go for a long drive and suddenly it drops in. This is creativity at its best. And it's very real. And this is one thing I've learned through training in Reiki, and it's something I've never actually shared anywhere before. So I'm very excited that you've asked me this question, is that I realized that in the healing world, in the energy world of Reiki, whatever you want to call it, because, every modality has its own standing and its own validity. You just go, and it's like flavors of ice cream. You go to whichever one feels better for you. Reiki happens to be a flavor of ice cream that I like. But what I learned is that when you do energy work, when you do healing energy work, the imagination is what you use to do the work. And it is as powerful as whatever you can touch or taste or smell, because there is a principle, and I don't know if you will agree with me, that everything manifests first in the energy field, and then suddenly, and then over time solidifies and becomes something that's more tangible. So the imagination is absolutely a path that can lead you to creation and creating another reality. And in fact, in clinical hypnotherapy, that's what you do. You try to take people into the trance stage so that they can imagine a different future than the one that they're living, especially if this future, if the present is riddled with beliefs that are not helping them. So you replace the beliefs by more helpful beliefs. And it works, not for everyone, obviously, and nothing is completely, 100% effective, but it works for a lot of people if they allow themselves the opportunity to explore it and to be curious and open-minded, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally. And
I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's where it took me anyway.
that's okay.
We are all creative in that way when we find solutions, when we found different ways, or when we get an idea that we haven't actually thought. Do you know those thoughts that like drop in?
Right.
They're not the consequences of a thought that you had just before that you'll have just after. They just kind of seem to come to us. For me, that's intuition, creativity at its best.
Yeah. Oh, like I'm all about that, because I just think I kind of live there a lot of the time as well, especially when I'm trying to, well, sometimes it's trying to create things or trying to find solutions, and allowing the solution to not be answered at that point in time. You know, like you say, that so that when you're in those states of not thinking, kind of that state of you're driving, you don't even know how you got from A to B, or you're in the shower, you're washing up, or you're walking, or wherever it is, that you just kind of go into that space of just presence and being, and not having to kind of like think about all that you should be doing, every kind of like movement that you have to make. Then it allows so many beautiful things to come in, so many solutions to come in, so many new ideas. I can't think of any idea that I haven't had that hasn't been a light bulb moment of some sort, you know, like, or even if it's just a response to something, or, you know, I'll go, like, a lot of the time I'll go to bed with knowing that I need to do certain things the next day. Like, you know, like last night, I'm like, okay, today I know I'm doing interviews and recording, but also in between times I need to record a podcast for myself. So what am I going to record? I don't know. Maybe I'm going to do it on this for myself. And then also I need to kind of create a sales page. What am I going to write on that? So I just went to bed with it. And then in the morning I wake up and I literally get the script in my head, like from start to finish. And it's like, okay, the thing to do for me, and I've learned the hard way, is just to make sure that I capture it, so that I make it tangible. And so I'm 100% there, because that's how stuff happens. That's how this podcast came about. It was like, do a podcast, you know, like everything came from me just being in that space, or allowing those things to get fed in. So, and that's why when I see people so resistant to it, I'm like, why are you, like, you don't realize how hard you're making your own life. As long as you can stay in the question of things, it means that you're open. There are avenues for all the information to come through to you, so that you can like see that there's a connection, that you are being answered. And you never know where it might come from. It may be that you'll just get, you know, what people call downloads, or you'll hear something, you'll overhear something, or a book will, like, I've heard people say that books open at the right chapter for them, or you sit down and you have a conversation with a complete stranger, like someone that you've never seen before and you'll never see again, and they just impart all the information that you need, and then you're just like, you've been answered. I mean, I'm sure people build empires on that, and like you're saying, with more entrepreneurial minds, like, you have to rely on that.
Think about Apple and Steve Jobs. We wouldn't have computers today if he hadn't had that big dream, at least not in the houses. They would have stayed just for companies. There's this big, massive rooms full of computing machines, you know? He started with his imagination. He had a vision and then he followed it. What's the difference between a vision and an imagination? I suppose it's because he acted on it. As you said, you have to capture it and you have to take action. And I think that's probably where people find it the hardest, is that action step, trusting it enough that you're going to put it in motion.
And you know what just came to me as you said the action step, I think this is where people may teeter around the edges of spirituality, that will kind of get kind of meshed in with new age stuff and other things that kind of flood the market a little bit. And especially when the law of attraction came, when people were really speaking about the law of attraction in a heavy way, like when The Secret became really popular, I think there was a lot of misunderstanding, or there was not necessarily all the information in the film, for a start, but also there was a lot of misunderstanding as to what that meant, because people kind of went into I'll just do a vision board and I'll just say affirmations, but not take any action. And a lot of people just didn't really understand that, you know, you're working in tandem with the force, with source, with God, with the universe, whatever you need to call that power around you. You have to walk in tandem with it. And what was really interesting, I remember when I saw that film, I was actually in Miami, visiting my aunt, and went to see a friend of hers who had it on DVD on this massive TV. So I was just like watching this film, just going, what is this? But what was interesting about that is prior to me going, I'd really started to dig into some books. So I was reading all of Wallace Wattles' books. I was rereading Florence Scovel Shinn's, these like old kind of books. I was reading Think and Grow Rich, Cybernetics. So all of those things about bringing your imagination and kind of working with this stuff, like I think Wallace Wattles calls it, there's this stuff that you work in tandem with, but you have to put the work in. And so then I saw this film, The Secret, and then that weekend we went to church. So it was like, one, I was watching this big, massive new, this new movie. And then at the weekend we'd gone to church, and I can't for the life of me remember what the preacher had said, but the scripture that he used pretty much just explained the law of attraction. And it was straight out of the Bible. And I was just like, okay. And everything just went like that, you know? And these are things that I'd been working with anyway. But it was just like seeing how, you know, because if for me, coming from a religious background and then kind of going off into this quest of all these different modalities, there's going to be like a little bit of guilt there, you know, like, well, I grew up with this and this doesn't say that in the Bible. And, you know, and for whatever you may think of the Bible, there, you know, there's value in there, there's misrepresentation in there, there's so many different ways that you can look at these books. But it was just seeing how there was a correlation between all of these different things. But ultimately what it came from was like your thoughts and your belief and your faith and your action, whichever kind of spot you were using it in. But I think where the law of attraction kind of like missed the boat on some, depending on who was kind of teaching it, was it didn't really necessarily put enough onus on the fact that you needed to take action. It was just, you know, kind of think and like drive around the corner and you're going to have a parking space. And yeah, you have those little things, but the bigger dreams, like you need to infuse it with action and intention and emotion and all of your sensories.
And align to it.
Yeah.
That is so important, the alignments, because if you're not aligned to it, that means you're dreaming something that you don't believe can actually happen. And in that case, that will never happen. Yeah. So you have to align your beliefs. This is why I found that combining Reiki and hypnotherapy is so powerful, because you have both the mind and the energy, and it's just it can take you to really new levels.
And also once I don't know how you'd respond to this, but when you get a real understanding of what your energy feels like, you know, like being able to feel energy in your body, being able to feel energy around you, being able to feel that you can emit energy, you know, even on the simple way of just like having a good thought towards something or somebody, what that feels like, the power of that, and knowing that you have this energy around you that you can then cultivate and expand on, and then you can direct it, you know, then you can create you can create your life, or create the desire of your life, without it feeling so hard. I think, you know, obviously there's hard work, there's hard work, there's long nights, there's challenges, but it's all part of the stuff. And it's all part of the stuff in that the more that you allow it to be, here's another curveball, just seeing it as something that's just going to strengthen your metal and your desire about it, you know, when it brings you more. I think, I don't really know where this idea of life is perfect and smooth came from, because it's doing everyone a real disservice and not seeing the beauty in our challenges, even the most painful of ones, the ones that, you know, we really have to dig deep, and the ones that will really kind of shift us and get to the point where even the things that are the most painful, the most challenging, the hardest to let go of, the hardest to forgive, are the ones that actually kind of free us into into being open to so much more for ourselves. I mean, like you've faced your own challenges. So how have your challenges shaped you and kind of changed the way that you work and see yourself?
I think if anything, it's deepened my understanding of how life works. Because it's one thing to think something, and we were talking about this just before we started recording. I've written a first memoir about my dad's last 3 months. He had a brain tumor, and it was his exit strategy, which I knew from the start. And when I had all these beautiful concepts and ideas and everything, and I was kind of like, okay, this is going to be the test, the test of the fire, or the litmus test, whatever you want to call it. Are all these beautiful spiritual ideas or new concept are they going to help me through this process? And I had a very open mind, and I wasn't sure it was going to do it. I had no idea how I was going to react. I hadn't had someone as close to me as my father died before. I had a couple of aunts, but it was a different kind of process. And it was amazing. All that stuff absolutely helped me to the point where actually my dad came to me energetically to give me a hug when I was driving in the UK. He was having a nap back in France to tell me, you have to come and see me. I am dying. Whereas everybody else was saying to me something completely different. They were all telling me that he was going to get better, that he was strong, that this, that, and the other. And no, he was actually calling me to come and visit him as soon as possible. So it completely, and the beauty of it, it's sad in a way, but the beauty of it is that when that corner was turned where his tumor came back with a vengeance in September of 2013, as I said, my mum kept on telling, you don't have to come. And everybody was in denial, basically. And I had no one to talk about the fact that I knew he was going, and I had to do what I had to do so that I wouldn't have any regrets. And the underlying idea of this memoir is that it's never too late to make peace with your dad or your mum or whoever it is that you're going to lose through death. And so I went to visit him, and the fact that it's almost like we talked telepathically. I wasn't really aware of that, but I knew where to take him. I knew he wanted to go to church. I took him to church. Nobody else had done it before. I took him to the market. I took him to this, to that. And we had the most magical time in the last, even though he could no longer talk and could no longer walk. So everybody else was shut out of his world. But for me, it was almost like I was invited into his inner world through all the tools that I'd learned before. And it was a truly magical time, including the day of his death was absolutely magical. I saw him rise to heaven, into a church, because that's what he believed at the time. And I felt, I didn't even feel that much sadness, because it was like a culmination of a journey, if that makes any sense. Oh, yeah. But of course, I was surrounded by people who were on completely different planets that I could not relate to at all. I couldn't share it with anybody. And what is really funny is ultimately, I never thought I would write a memoir about it. It's a year or two after his death when I started writing, and I only realized after I finished the second draft that it was my dad who was writing the memoir with me. And I had the sign came in because I had done the first draft, and I was writing another book completely at the time. I was writing a novel that I was really passionate about, and I was working with a book coach who took us on a sort of like a little journey where we're going to meet the book that wanted to be written at that time. And my novel would never made it to that meeting. It was this memoir that dropped in, and I was like, what's going on? And the reason I knew my dad had been writing the memoir with me all along, literally a year on, is because when the time came to do my first edit, which is quite a heavy one on the first draft for people who know how to write books, I had to do it with a fountain pen with purple ink. And I didn't understand why. There was no way I couldn't touch my computer, even though I type faster than I write. And then when I finished, I realized my dad loved fountain pens, and purple was kind of like this spiritual ink that was connecting us. I was like, oh, it was like the penny dropped so far into the journey, but it was amazing. So I think I've lost a little bit the question that you just asked me, and I hope I answered it.
We were talking about just getting through difficulties.
And that stuff definitely helps. I can tell you, I was not the same person going on that journey than I was when I lost someone else that I loved dearly 10, 15 years before. It makes a huge difference. That doesn't mean you don't still have strong feelings. That doesn't mean that you don't get angry, sad, frustrated. All that happens, and it needs to be acknowledged. No bypassing. Because I know in the spiritual community, sometimes people bypass all the negative emotions, thinking you can't be spiritual if you're angry, for example. I have to call on the BS on that.
I've seen people bypass quite successfully for many years and then hit the ground with a thud. You know, when life happens and your practice is not going to serve you, really, you know, if you haven't done the work.
And I would say, for me, the work has been the healing journey and taking responsibility for my feelings. That's been the most important thing, because I think before I went on that journey, I tended to blame a lot of other people. I was really like, I'm blaming my mother, I'm blaming my dad, I'm blaming the economy, I'm blaming this, that, and the other. As when I stopped blaming everyone, I was like, okay, what am I responsible for? What are my patterns? And I was almost forced to go to therapy to look at my patterns. I took myself there because I didn't want to, I knew I was going to become a parent sooner or later. And I wanted to make sure that none of the baggage for me or my ancestor were going to be dumped on my kids. But I think that's when the real work started, is by looking at my patterns, looking at my stuff, owning it, and stopping blaming everyone.
Well, that's a big responsibility that we all have to come to terms with, really. And it's interesting how people will shy away from that responsibility because it's so easy to point the finger at all the things that are the problem. So you can either do one or two things. You can point the finger at everything external, your circumstances, like you say, the world, the government, the just
economy.
Like, you know, put yourself in the position of a victim, which, you know, to an extent, like, you can justify because the stories are true. Or then you can go completely the opposite end of the spectrum and find a practice that will pull you out of your self energetically and just keep you in a bliss state where you're like, you know, it's love and light only, and you don't want people, you're triggered by everything and all this kind of stuff, you know. And I see it a lot, a way of procrastinating, a way of not making any decisions by blaming it on like where the moon is. Yeah, you know, because you can wake up some days and energetically stuff does feel heavy, but how much of our life are we going to spend like waiting for the kind of the transits to kind of turn in our favor, or whatever it is that you're waiting to happen? Like, that's where I think sometimes spirituality or new age then kind of gets used as a buffer for anyone actually taking any responsibility for themselves that way. So it kind of goes both ends, you know. It's like either you blame everything externally, or you use your spiritual practices for you to be like a lilting empath that can't deal with the world because the world is too hard. The world is hard, but it doesn't mean that you can't be empowered. And like you say, it's coming to that point in the center where you're like, okay, I know all of these, I have all of these stories because these stories are all true. These things did happen to me. Yes, I grew up in that family. Yes, the economy is shit. Yes, this is the color of my skin. You know, like all of the things that you can blame your problems on. And then all of the, yes, the moon is here, and yes, or, you know, but then you kind of find the middle ground and just kind of find the power and take the responsibility. And I think that's the hard part, is just not wanting to take the responsibility and realizing that there comes a point where it's your fault if things continue going forward. And like you said, like you knew that you wanted to be a parent and you were just like, I need to kind of clean up that baggage, so I'm just not dumping it on the next generation. You know. And I think that's where especially in this time where we are more cognizant and aware of how all of our pasts have affected us, that if you're aware of it, then it is the responsibility is with you to clean that stuff up, whether you choose, you know, whatever you choose to create in the world, be it a family or be it a business, because a business in itself is birthing from you and is a reflection of you. And if you still have all of that stuff, you know, if you've got problems with relationships and then you're creating a business where you're going to then have employees or outsource your work and work in collaboration with people, if you've not cleaned up that element of, you know, relationships or being able to relate, then it just kind of carries over, you know, that lack of responsibility. And I see it myself as working as a sole trader, independent contractor, whatever you want to call it, is that you kind of bump up against people a lot of stuff that just hasn't dealt with. And ironically, especially working in the wellness and spirituality sector, if you want to call it that, from a business aspect, a lot of that stuff just still shows up, you know, a lot of unhealed stuff that you're dealing with through people's business or trying to do collaborations with them, is when they've not dealt with stuff, then you're dealing with their traumas and their unhealed stuff on a business level. And it's just interesting how it kind of translates, and that we always have to be always working on all of our things, cleaning up our relationships with everything, and our responsibility for the way that we show up in the world, to not only be parents to future humans, but also to be parents to the economy, you know, the new businesses, the entrepreneurial things that we do. So like that healing is just so necessary with everything. And you know, for me, I can recognize when people haven't dealt with certain things in the way that I deal with them on a business level. You're like, okay, you can see threads of unhealed stuff leaking into business.
Yeah, I think the entrepreneurial journey is definitely a journey of self-discovery, self-development, and it's probably quite actually a demanding spiritual path, because, as you say, all your stuff shows up because you're at the center of your business. So any unresolved stuff is going to show up, and you have to clean up after yourself. Absolutely.
So tell me about this new summit, this soul summit that you've got. Am I saying it right?
So no, it's not called Soul. It's called the True Spirituality Summit. And it literally popped into my mind about a month ago, because I've always had this frustration with the spiritual circles, let's put it this way. It started very early on because I was looking to try and develop myself spiritually, etc. And I came across all these people, and it was always either that I didn't have the money or the time because I was a single mom. And when I shared my frustration of the fact that I couldn't have that spiritual support where I was as a full-time working mom of 2 children with no support system or very little. All they said is, you should wait until your kids are grown up to explore that. And I was like, no, I need it now. I want to be a better person for my children. So I suppose I wanted to talk about grounded spirituality in all different aspects of life. So I have speakers who are coming to speak about health, money, relationships, body, self-love, pleasure. There's 7 different topics and it's the very first time I'm running this summit. I've never run a summit before, so it's very exciting for me to have all these speakers come together. And it's to give people who can't really relate to either the religious world or the spiritual circles that are too like new agey, people who are more like maybe who I was when I was confronted or exposed to all that stuff. Like you were talking earlier about astrology, the moon cycle. I've never really related to any of that. And one of the things also that really irks me when I speak to people who call themselves spiritual is the first small obstacle that comes their way, they say, oh, it was not meant to be. And I was like, for me, that's just one of the things that really gets on my nerves. So I suppose I wanted to give like a third option for people who can't really relate to religion and who can't relate to the New Age world and who want to find something more grounded, and to realize that actually there are as many versions of spirituality as there are ice cream flavors, especially if you go to America. and that you just need to find the one that you like, and that it's actually what feels right for you that is the right thing for you. And that it has to come from within, and to stop seeking all these gurus or all these external experiences and come back to self. So it's about also stripping spirituality from all the trappings, like the crystals or the human design profiles or astrology even. Or so I've actually made a post on social media literally yesterday where I said, this is not going to talk about this and that. So we're not going to talk about ascension, or we're not going to talk about 4D, 5D, 6D, because this really gets on my nerves, in the sense that it becomes almost like this ego trap where you latch onto something And so we're just bringing it back to basics. And each speaker is going to debunk 3 myths in their own area where they work in. So the first speaker I interviewed, she's a medical intuitive, and it was such a powerful conversation, because I'm hoping that when people listen to her interview, they'll have a completely different outlook on their own health and what their body's trying to tell them, and how they can empower themselves through listening to the signs from their bodies, especially if they've had so many diagnoses and don't know how to be healthy. And then I want to translate that in every possible area of our lives that we can be confronted with, or that we have to make decisions in. And I want it to be like very, very practical, like something that can be used on a day-to-day basis to enhance, I suppose, people's experiences. And also, most people don't realize they're spiritual when they are, because for me, spirituality is about kindness and compassion. And I actually invited a speaker to come to the summit, and she refused because she said, no, I'm not spiritual. And I could see that she was actually very spiritual, and she would have been a perfect match. She couldn't see it, so obviously it wasn't a match. But I think that too many people, and I used not to consider myself spiritual at all. And I could still not consider myself, because I get angry and I'm going through a difficult divorce and this and that. And sometimes I'm full of fears. But that's part of spirituality. We're not living in this little cloud over there where we ascend and when we become more spiritual, no shit ever happens to us anymore. Absolutely not. It's just that we deal with it a lot better. Right. And we know how to navigate things, and we know how to fall back on our feet much quicker, or in a better way. Yes. So yeah, that's where this summit came from. And it's happening on the 7th of July, all online. And yeah, I'm really excited about it.
You're speaking my language on so many levels. And it's interesting as well, like, even though there's these kind of terminologies, and I've got a story for like every single one of those ones where it's that I'm getting it, that I will get like kind of like pissed off and triggered about like people's excuses when they use spiritual excuses not to just make a fucking decision there and then. You know what I mean? It's just like, especially like even simple things like the time when I was doing people's websites and stuff like that. I'm like, what kind of colors do you like? Oh, I need to go, like, what colors do you like? Just kind of, we've got a time frame. You want a website, like, give me like a couple of colors. Don't have to go and like feel into it or like dilly-dally about the whole thing. Like, sometimes we need to be clear and present and make a decision. And I think if you have a strong connection to your intuition, you can make immediate decisions. And I think where that comes from, that kind of dilly-dallying and waiting on the moon and waving things, and I'm all for the trinkets if you want the trinkets, but don't use the trinkets to not make a decision when someone's asking you to make a decision in the moment, or then kind of like give it some pushback, and you then use all the terminologies of like, oh, you're having a day where you're like 5D and the 3D, I've heard them all. And so it's not to say that there isn't beauty in all of these things, but like maybe we'll ascend. Maybe we'll have like kind of like 9-dimensional beings come and lift us up into the new earth. But it's Monday today. At this point in time, like, we have to be here. Do you know what I'm saying? And I get it. And the tussles that I've had over the time with people about this kind of spiritual language and all of these kind of ideas of things is kind of living in the future and wanting to be that. And like, yeah, we need to make plans of things. And like, wouldn't it be great if we just had, they came and swept us up and took us off the world. We went and lived in spiritual utopia for the rest of our eternity. But until that happens, we're here at this moment in time. So why don't we use that aspect of ourselves that is interdimensional to inform the moment, as opposed to kind of tripping out into this never and not dealing with what's happening now. And I'm all about, even when I said, oh, I'm going to call myself a spiritual life coach, you're thinking about the way that people find those words. But the wording that I always use is I want to de-dogmatize and unwoo-woo spirituality. You are a spiritual being. It's just an extra layer of you knowing yourself. It's giving you additional tools. It's giving you an extra gear to run your earthly life in a really magical way. Like the fact that people still shy away from it is maybe they've just not delved into it and seen in and kind of like noted down the evidence of it working in their life, because it is, but you're kind of like cutting that area of yourself off for whatever reason, whether you don't believe it or you're just concerned about what people say, which then means that you need more work to do to just get to the point where it doesn't really matter what people say. Like because you're connected to yourself, and if people don't get it, they don't get it. It's a shame, because I'm just getting like extra, I'm getting extra juice. My life is being fed in a way that's kind of like giving me a shortcut every now and again to kind of leap over things and understand things. So yeah, I'm like, everything that you say about that, I love, because like, those are the things like when people are just going like, oh, but come on now, like, let's not do that, because then you're not allowing people who would benefit from spirituality to really understand it, because you're going into woo-woo land.
Yeah, it puts other people off, whereas because it's almost becomes a bit of a snobbish kind of little world of their own, and I want everyone to think that they're spiritual. And maybe if I can conclude this conversation with the one quote, my favorite quote, spiritual quote, which is from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who said, and everybody knows the quote, but they don't know his name, so that's why I'm putting him there. He said, we're not human beings on a spiritual journey, we're spiritual beings on a human journey. And so it's the humaning that is going to make us better people. It's not being lost in the spiritual, because we already came from there. And if we've decided to become humans, that's because there's something in the human experience that is bringing gold to ourselves and others. Yeah.
Right. I'm glad you attributed it because it's been every other name that I known has been put under that on a meme on the internet. So it's great that it came there. So we've reached the end. We've had like a really great conversation. So can you just let everyone know how to sign up for the summit, and then how to just get in contact with you in general, Ange?
So I post quite a lot on my Facebook profile about it. I have a page called True Spirituality with Ange. I have a free group called by the same name where I share quite a bit as well. And I'm hoping that maybe you could share the link for the sign up on the notes for this episode. Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah.
I've really, and as I said, I've shared things I've not shared before, so that was fun. So thank you, and thank you to all the listeners if they've gone so far. That's a real honor and a privilege.
Thank you, Ange, for your thrilling conversation, and thank you for listening. You can find out more about me on my website, carolmaywhittick.com, carolmaewhittick.com. The Embody Her journey is still available for you to take. It's a completely free week-long journey, taking 3 steps closer to become the woman of your dreams, getting into the feeling and the visioning of your future self, embodying that energy and moving forward confidently as you create your future in the now. If you want to connect with me on social media, it's Carol May Whittick on Facebook and Kazmic, Kazmick, on Instagram. Also, please tune into Her Inspirations, Higher Energetic Resonance Inspirations. It's 6 months old now. It's a sister podcast to Her Conversations. Each week I tackle a different subject, look at it from a spiritual and psychological aspect, work through it and see the ways that we can apply it to our lives for healing. So until the next episode, speak soon.